Pushkin. On the show, they have this major flaw. They're intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine. The wind doesn't always blow. This is a fact you might reflect on as you are gazing out at some majestic vista. Maybe you're on a bluff overlooking the sea. And then you notice something. The waves. They never stop. They may be bigger or smaller, but they're always there. If only there were some way to capture the energy that is right there in those waves. This is not a new idea. People have wanted to do this for literally hundreds of years. Unfortunately, though, it's not as easy as it sounds. There are a lot of problems to solve. But sometime, probably in the next few weeks, a tugboat will pull a yellow 30-foot-long wave energy converter out of Honolulu Harbor and around to a mooring on the north shore of Oahu. There, a crew of engineers will basically plug this thing into a cable on the ocean floor. And if everything goes according to plan, it will start producing electricity. I'm Jacob Goldstein, and this is What's Your Problem? My guest today is Tim Mundon, Chief Technology Officer at Oscilla Power. Tim's problem is this: how do you turn the waves in the ocean into electrical power? One of the interesting things to me about your field is it seems really hard, right? I mean, it's been this period, the 20 or so years you've been in the field. It seems like wave power has been like one challenge after another. I don't know. I mean, this is me not knowing much about it, but.
Well, that's true, but it's not just since I've been in the field. It's been a lot longer than that. I mean, the first patent on wave energy was filed in, I think, 1799, which is kind of crazy, really.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the challenge comes from the fact that when you look into the ocean, you think, well, that's pretty straightforward. The waves just move up and down. We can just put something on it to be able to harness that energy. And you can.
All that energy is right there. You can see it where the water moves up and down, right?
But there are fundamental challenges that make that we found that mean that that's not quite so straightforward. Uh-huh. You could create this long list, but in essence, there's a massive amount of energy in a relatively small space. It's the power density. And because it's so high, and much higher than wind or solar, that it has a tendency to break things. Uh-huh. And so you not only have to have something that's efficient, but you also have to have something that's strong. And oftentimes those are in conflict with each other.
Interesting. So if you build something that's tough enough to float out there in the waves and survive, it's not as good as capturing the energy, and vice versa.
Well, yeah, that's precisely correct.
And so is there an underlying problem there that's a problem for anybody trying to turn ocean waves into electrical power, which is that the ocean moves in all different directions. It moves in three dimensions, up and down and side to side. And that's way more complicated than like having a windmill and the wind blows into it and it turns. Like, is that a starting problem? Is that the motion is in kind of all different directions in the ocean?
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's more than that as well. And maybe we can kind of simplify it in many ways. It is that energy doesn't flow in a linear fashion. It moves in a very different way. It actually moves in the particles. Ocean particles move in circles. Uh-huh. And so you don't have this linear flow particles like you would in wind. And so that's the first big problem. The second big problem as well is, it's much denser. And so you have this, you have to manage that high power density as well. And it also high variability as well on a very short time frame. Now, over longer time periods, waves are extremely consistent. It's much more consistent than wind or solar, but over the course of a few seconds, waves change quite a lot. And you have to factor all of that into that capture part of the system.
So I know you have these two different sort of models, these two different wave power generators you're working on. One's called the Triton C. It's a big one and a little one. It's the little one that's further along. That's the one in Honolulu right now. When exactly is that one going to be installed, going to be turned on?
It's a really good question. We're currently waiting for weather windows. The site that we're using it's an energetic site. So the waves are big, which means that it can sometimes be challenging for the sort of construction operations that need to go in order to make the site ready. And so we're waiting for the right window to be able to take that system around Hawaii from Honolulu to Kaneohe, which is on the north side of the island.
So is that like next few weeks, next few months?
Honestly, we're hoping that it is in the next few weeks.
So let's talk. I know this is a smaller one. And will that be the first real world, out there generating power thing for you guys?
For us, that's right. That'll be our first commercial type unit that will be plugged into the grid and generating power. We've done other ocean deployments before this point in order to be able to demonstrate elements of the technology. We've previously deployed out in New Hampshire and done ocean deployments there where we've been able to look at specific elements and prove that they work. But this will be the first integrated, complete system connected to the grid.
So let's talk about the device, the Triton.
Sure.
Is the little one the Triton C or is the big one the Triton C? Sorry.
The little one is the Triton C. It's really innovatively named for the C to stand for community. We could have come up with something a little bit more exciting, but no. Triton is the name of the larger system.
Triton is good. Triton is very exciting. I think staying with that is smart. So this thing that is sitting there in Honolulu right now, that's about to get towed out and plugged in, for lack of a better word. Tell me just, what does it look like? How big is it?
Of course. So the Triton architecture, which all of our systems follow, comprises a floating object on the surface, a hull. Hanging beneath that hull is a ring. That stays very still while the surface float is being moved by waves. And then the relative motion of those two bodies is what generates power.
So there's the piece that floats on the surface. The ones I've seen in pictures are yellow, just to help picture it, right? And that's floating there on the surface. And there are a few, 3 or 4 cables going down from the surface, connecting to this ring that is suspended under the water below the floating part of the Triton, right?
That's correct. And because there are 3 lines that connect the float to the ring, all the motions that the waves move the float with translate into relative motion, and that's what generates power.
So let's talk that through a little bit. So you've got the 3 lines connecting the ring under the water to the thing floating. And what you're saying is when everything is floating side to side or kind of back and forth, that's all generating power, right? So how does that work? What's actually happening?
So what you say is absolutely correct. So all of that generates relative motion between the two bodies. So in the Triton C, that causes a drum to rotate. That rotation of that drum turns a generator. It's quite straightforward.
And that's all inside the thing that's floating on the surface.
That's correct.
The drum and the generator, that's all inside the floating thing. Yeah.
That's right. So it all happens inside there. There's obviously there's power electronics and there's electrical power systems that allow us to take that power and move it outside of the float. And
there's just a cable that runs under the ocean sea floor or something? There's a line running from the Triton to the floor to a cable?
Yeah, it's almost as simple as that. It's slightly more involved, but not much more, honestly. You would have, it's actually no different than what would be done for an offshore wind project. They lay cables along the seafloor. They have an interconnection point, and then there's a cable that goes from our device down to the seafloor to connect into it. It's pretty straightforward. It's been done for many years.
And so the Triton C, the smaller one, that's about to be deployed, how big is it? How big is the part that floats on the surface?
It's 10 meters long, which I think is about 30 feet.
30 plus feet. Okay. So pretty big, not that little.
Yeah. And there's obviously space inside for all of the equipment, plus engineers themselves. Obviously, any access would be for maintenance.
So this thing is there in Honolulu Harbor. Sort of any day now. It sort of reminds me of like a rocket launch, right? When they got the rocket ready to launch and they're just waiting for everything to come into line, right? And they put it off and they wait and then they do it. So this thing that's going to happen any day, a ship is going to tow the Triton C out to sea and hook it up, basically?
Literally, all that is needed is a tugboat will come, will hook up to the system, it will tow it to the site. We'll attach the moorings, and then it will be ready to go. It really it's quite straightforward, but it obviously requires certain sea states. It couldn't go out in the highest waves because when you're towing something, you wouldn't want, an enormous storm to be breaking those tow lines and things like that. So there is a particular limit to that installation.
Is there already a power line, on the seafloor there? How does that piece of it work?
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the main reasons why we're going here. is because this is what's called the Wave Energy Test Site. Again, it's another really interesting acronym. WETS is what it's known as.
That is a good acronym, though. WETS is a good acronym for testing wave energy.
And there are other test sites as well, but for the moment, this is the main one in the US. So they already have a subsea cable. They have 3 berths. And so we're going into one that's 30 meters of water depth. And yes, it has a submarine cable coming out to it.
And the idea is the device, the Triton C, will start generating power immediately, tow it out.
That's correct.
Plug it in, turn it on like a lamp.
Yes, actually, it is as simple as that.
In a minute, how do we get from plugging in a prototype in Hawaii to wave-generated power at scale? That's the end of the ads. Now we're going back to the show. Given that you're just now, out in the real ocean for the first time, the thing I'm thinking about, given this conversation, is like, how long is it going to last? How often is it going to break? Right? Like, these seem like super hard things you're just going to have to figure out by having your products out in the ocean and having them break and understanding how they break and how to make them break less.
And that's exactly right. We can only do so much. Yes, the whole point in testing is to be able to evaluate it. The ocean is an extremely harsh environment. The seawater itself is, terrible on metal components. And we're trying to look at minimizing that. There's fouling, which is there's all these list of challenges that we spent a lot of time trying to mitigate to this point. But we won't really know the impact unless we can take some solid long duration time in the water. And that's where we're at right now. That being said, there is an enormous amount of experience within just companies in the marine space that have solved these challenges before. So half of the battle is finding out what the challenge is. And then we can kind of reach out to these people to solve it.
Figure out what's going to break, and then figure out who's fixed similar problems in the past.
Precisely,
and figure out how they fixed them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it's at a test site. Is the sole purpose of this just to see if it works, or does it have some additional function besides the sort of research piece?
So we have hopes for what we can do with it after we complete this testing. Although that's still to be determined. Yeah. And so we're going to be testing it, checking everything is exactly as we intend it to be. And then once that testing is complete, the intent or the hope is to bring it back to Washington State, where we can have it generate power to a native or tribal community, ideally somewhere in Washington.
Is there any particular reason that a native or tribal community is the optimal use case?
Well, the Triton C itself is intended for one of 2 different markets: the community, remote, isolated communities, and in many cases, these tribal communities are very isolated. They don't have good energy security, so this is an ideal solution for those that are on the coast. There is also the possibility for power at sea applications, where you can provide power at remote locations, very remote at sea locations where there are no other sources of power.
So it might be a substitute for like places where the power goes off and people use gas generators regularly. Like it's a sort of like, instead of having to use the gas generator, you can use the Triton C. Is it something like that? Is it that kind of, am I thinking the right scale if I'm thinking that way?
You are thinking about it in the right way, especially when you consider that in many remote communities, getting fuel to these communities is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
They can't always, you could be on an island somewhere. They could be, in remote Alaska. Just the cost of fuel transport is an order of magnitude more than the cost of the fuel itself.
Yeah.
And so the actual cost of power generation in those places is exceptionally high.
And it's also a very inefficient way to get power, right? Burning fuel in a fuel generator it's costly, and has a big carbon footprint, right?
It has a big carbon footprint, that's correct. For us, the goal here is really doing that at a large scale. So, the small communities can benefit quite a lot from this technology, but we can all benefit a lot from being able to scale this up to multi-megawatt systems.
When you think, kind of looking out further into the future, about getting from where you are now to having Tritons, 1,000 full-scale Tritons floating in the ocean, generating real power, at real scale. Like, I'm sure there's a million things you have to figure out, but are there a few big questions, big problems in your head of things you have to solve to get from here to there?
Not as many as you might think. One of our biggest challenges is the manufacturing scale up. But much of the technology is resolved at this point. We have an architecture that works. We have a system designed that works. And one of the key things with our approach is that it's scalable. We have one system that generates 1 megawatt. You therefore have two systems that generate 2 megawatts. And then you literally just keep adding it.
And there are a few other companies doing what you're doing, right? At these government sites, as you said, there's a few different berths. When your Triton C gets towed out in Hawaii, will there be other companies' devices, products floating out there next to it?
Probably not, but we do have other competitors, colleagues, really, because we're all in the space together, who are also working on the problem. At this point, the other company that will be going out at a similar time is a company called Sea Power. And there's also another US company that did a deployment who are at a maybe slightly earlier stage called CalWave, that are based down in California. And we're all working together, but we're all working together to solve the same problem. And I think ultimately in the future, we will all be having part of the overall mix there. There'll be different solutions for different locations.
So you've been in this field for 20 plus years.
That makes me feel old.
It's been a time. Sorry, I've been in my field for 20 plus years as well. And I'm not about to deploy something in Hawaii. So you got that going for you. It's been a time when there has been this incredible growth in solar and wind power. It seems like wave power has been much harder. And I'm curious how that's been for you. I mean, has it been harder than you expected? Do you feel like you have lessons from it?
That's a really good question, and I haven't really thought of it in that way before. It's been frustrating in many ways because you can see the amount of funding and progress that's going into wind and the scale up that's been achieved. But on the other hand, it also shows what we can achieve. So in some ways, it's a little frustrating when you see the amount of money that's gone into it and the fact that we are a little bit further behind and that we do have a much more difficult technology challenge to solve. On the other hand, once we solve it, then we have a huge potential market.
You got the whole ocean. There's waves all the time, everywhere.
That's right. Especially, if you look at where the majority of cities are, they're on coastlines. And so you can actually install wave energy converters in locations that are close to load. That has other significant advantages.
We'll be back in a minute with the lightning round. Now let's get back to what's your problem. Let's finish with the lightning round. What's one thing that's surprising about waves that most people don't know?
That they don't flow like water. The individual wave particle moves around in a circle that if you actually go out into the ocean and you put something down on the surface of the water, it doesn't flow along with the waves. It actually moves around in a circle. And so it's only the energy that moves along with the waves, not the actual water particles.
I also learned from your LinkedIn page that you were the archery club captain in grad school.
Yeah.
Do you still, what do you say, do archery? I don't even know the verb. Do you still arch?
I do. I shoot sometimes is what's used.
Do you still shoot?
Yes, I do. And I have been, I think now for, since I've been 18 months old. It's always been a thing, a kind of...
Did you say since you've been 18 months old?
I did, actually, yes. There's actually a photograph of my father teaching me how to shoot.
A baby with a bow and arrow?
Probably not. But no,
it was the 70s.
Exactly. Now you've told everybody how old I am. But so I've done archery for 30, 40 years basically, and it's.
What is it about archery? What is it about archery that keeps you doing it? Why do you love it?
Part of it is the fact that you do it for a long time, so you get better at it, you get good at it, and therefore you like being good at something, and so therefore you can continue to be good at. And I've been lucky enough to represent the national team for a number of years. And so you do it because of that. Also, part of it is that just there's a certain amount of joy in shooting an arrow.
You have a favorite mythological archer?
Not really. No? Honestly, the way it's always conveyed in books and in fiction, it's always frustrating. You're like, no, that's not how you do it. And it's like screaming at the TV or various things. It's like, what is going on here?
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone trying to solve a hard problem?
I think you've got to persevere, basically. But you've also got to go back to first principles. Sometimes you'll come across something that's seemingly intractable. And then perseverance is extremely important, but sometimes you have to take a step back, look at first principles, look at what other people have done, and then come at it again. Maybe this time from a different angle. That's probably one bit of advice.
Tell me a little more about perseverance. Like in your particular case, right? You've been working on this for a long time. Is there something about you? Is there something about the problem? Like, how have you hung in there for so long?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. I'm not even sure I have a great answer for that. But I would say that I really enjoy it. I really enjoy creating something in the sense that you have multiple problems here, and then you can, if you approach it correctly, you can break those down into individual parts, and then you can solve those independently, and then you can share that knowledge. And so the being able to publish and share that knowledge and discuss it and help, and then use that and what other people have done in order to solve a subsequent problem, that's invigorating. I think that's one of the reasons why I've kept involved in this, and also because I believe right now the end is in sight. We are close to being able to create a commercial system. And to be part of that is fantastic.
Tim Mundon is the Chief Technical Officer of Oscilla Power.